I think we owe a debt of honour as a country to our Gurkhas. For 200 years they've served this country, and in every war that Britain has been involved in they have played some part, and they have been involved in some of the most difficult and demanding engagements in British military history, including particularly the defence of India in World War II, when Gurkha soldiers were involved in hand-to-hand fighting to stop the Japanese advance on India in 1944. They were involved in the Falklands War, and also in Afghanistan. And I have to say, I read the book by Kailash Limbu about his own service in Afghanistan, which is incredibly powerful and moving, and I'd recommend that to colleagues from across the House. These are the bravest of the brave, as was said earlier. And in my own community, they make an enormous contribution. We have several thousand Gurkhas and Nepalese residents living in Reading, and that's a common experience for communities across Berkshire and outer London. And I would like to pay tribute to one or two individuals, if I may, very briefly, before touching on the issue of the importance of dealing with the cost of living crisis, particularly for the pre-1997 pensioners. So just very, very briefly, I would like to mention Chandra Bukathoy, who has played an incredible role in developing the Forgotten British Gurkha charity in Reading, which provides support across a whole range of areas to veterans and their families. And it's worth considering that many family members and older Gurkhas themselves, particularly their wives, but some other relatives, don't often have a very high level of English. When they were serving in the army, often orders and instructions were conveyed in Nepali. And it's important to remember that there are some very practical barriers to life in Britain. And Chandra was instrumental in developing this very important charity for our community. Other notable Gurkhas or Nepalese residents who I know, I'd like to very briefly mention community worker Ram Galani, who's a former Gurkha, very notable member of our community. Practitioner Gurung, who's a nurse, whose father was a Gurkha in the Indian Army, not in the British Army. And also, most of all, Gyanraj Rai, who's a notable campaigner who many of you may have heard of, who's raised the issue of the Gurkha pensions for many years. The practical issues that our residents face, which are significant, it's worth briefly touching on those. My experience of the pre-97 Gurkhas who I've campaigned for since 2013 is that many live in poor quality housing, live on very, very small incomes in the southeast of England or outer London, and are really struggling, and indeed many other high cost parts of the country as well. They are really struggling because of very tight finances. So to give you an idea, the pensions we're talking about can be as little as £300 a month. Added to pension credit, that maybe brings an income for a couple of £1,600. To rent a terraced house in Reading, that would take your entire income. So these are people who are really struggling, who have given us incredible service, often living in poor quality accommodation. They're incredibly proud, incredibly hardworking, making an enormous contribution to Britain and to local communities across the country. And I do hope that the Minister will listen to today's debate very carefully. I know he's a great supporter of our armed forces families and has done a huge amount to support them, and will think about the issues facing this very particular group of veterans and their families.